Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I hope all of you enjoyed the mentalist session, Mr. Kumar's session, and now my colleague Manu's session as well. So a couple of them left now. I think this is the last session from my end. Then my colleague Manu and Vartika will moderate another session. I guess. Thank you so much. So Raghav, glad to have you here. Uh,
Thank you, Amol.
yeah, so obviously the topic of this session is CFO's challenges on mastering change and conquering it. We partly discussed the mastering change with few CFOs in the morning. But here we are trying to explore more with one of the, I don't know what to call it, a largest e-commerce company, a tech company, or maybe a cloud company, or I don't know what. In fact, there is a saying that Amazon is competing with everybody. That's sometimes people say it's not just a single company, but it's everywhere. You name the company in the world and perhaps Amazon is there in that segment. So Raghav, the basic question before I get into specifications is, and if you could share give us highlights in terms of how do you as a CFO operate from your desk? What are the verticals that you do? How do you look at the whole finance picture? Because it's so many businesses, I'm sure there will be so many invoices, I'm sure there will be so many vendors. How do you actually, look at how do you see the CFO's world from your desk?
Yeah, thanks. It's a pretty good question. It's very important for the CFO to be well connected with the business. And I think the first point I would say is the CFO should spend a lot of his or her time speaking with his or her business partners, participating in business reviews, and as we use the word in Amazon, listening to the voice of the customer, because that's exactly how you know your business is doing well in terms of serving your customers or not, So I think to answer your question, where should a CFO spend his or her time? It's staying connected with the business, and through the business, understanding what is really happening with the customer, that is really the center of the business, and hearing the voice of the customer anecdotes or data that pertains to that customer. That's one side of it. The other part is, I think every CFO should also stay connected to the pulse of the finance team, because that's the team that you're leading. So what is the morale of the team? What conversations is the team having? Do they feel good about their job? Are they feeling stretched enough? And what is their point of view? And do they have a point of view which is different from the point of view that may be the dominant logic in that company? I think listening to that is a second part of it. The third part I would say is what I would call on governance and mechanisms, making sure that you're looking at your numbers, your performance, you look at the budget, the deviation versus the budget, your balance sheet, the health of the balance sheet, the cash flows, your compliance reports, and all of it. So I think these three things, if you do well, then as a CFO, you can generally stay connected with your business somewhat.
Okay. Noted your points, Raghav. Very meaningful one. So how many, just give us some sense, how many invoices do you receive on a monthly basis, and how do you process them?
So the number of invoices run probably into millions. It's a very large scale that we operate. I'm talking about the global scale at which we operate. We don't look at invoices in that sense. A lot of it is automated. In fact, many companies, and including Amazon, you've reached a scale where I think the role of human beings in inspecting invoices should be minimal. You should use technology to be able to scan the invoices, process them. Only exceptions should be handled by human beings. At least that's the way we look at it, and that is our way of thinking about the scale in which we want to sort of operate. It doesn't always work that flawlessly, but that's at least our vision, that technology should help you operate at that scale, not really human beings. So therefore, human beings actually looking at invoices is actually a defect in the way in which we think about it.
Okay, sure, Raghav. So when we speak about now mastering the change, that is our important topic. And most of the CFOs are trying to see, how they can actually deal with the things which are evolving on a daily basis. And, I have been talking about it since morning, and most of the times that by the time you take a decision and execute it, there is another decision which you have to take, and perhaps you will find yourself really late to that. So how do you ensure that you are taking decisions constantly? And mastering the art of in fact taking those decisions constantly.
Yeah. Maybe one way to answer that is, see, you can always get lost in the change. There will be so many variables that are changing: interest rates, capital, your P&L, your sales, your employee count, your employee turnover. A lot of things would be changing. I think the important thing that you should always deal with is what is not going to change and focus on that. For example, your decision framework. Make sure that your people understand the framework with which you take decisions. Think long term is one example. Yeah? Of course, be mindful of what is happening in the short term, but think long term. Another example that we follow very elaborately at Amazon is, are we focused sufficiently on the customer, and are we able to serve the customer today better than we were able to serve earlier, and things like that. So if you have a set of these principles embedded in the organization, and make sure that the things that are embedded in the organization are not going to change, that I think is the best way to deal with change. Another example is, and I could go on about it, is making sure that you look at the cash flows in the organization and actually connect the cash flows to how you are serving the customer. If that link you can draw, that you're serving the customer and you have metrics which are non-financial in nature, which tells you that you are serving the customer very well, and then you look at your financial metrics on cash flow, and if you're able to correlate and connect between the two, that is something that I think you should be focused on. And irrespective of whatever change is happening in the environment, just staying laser focused on this will sort of help you just do a better job.
Okay. At your desk, in your team, how many people work? I sometimes always wonder whether you also have robots in your team, you also have maybe bots in your team. I'm sure bots will be there. Do you also, take Alexa's help in terms of settling your balance sheets? Do you command Alexa in terms of do this, do that?
So we're not at a state where we take Alexa's help for the balance sheet. I think we focus on helping Alexa to work with our consumers and customers. But yes, the answer is we do have bots. We have a lot of our financial processes that are mechanized, and that helps us sort of, as I was explaining earlier, operate with scale. But at the end of the day, human beings are really the important ones. In fact, the question that you asked brings out a very important point, and I've actually shared this in some sessions earlier. One of our senior leaders at Amazon had this quote that in the leaders of the future will only spend half their time managing people. Yeah? The remaining half they will actually spend managing machines. Yeah? Yeah. Normally you think leaders spend their entire time managing people, but in the future you need to think about scale and technology in a way where you have algorithms and policies and automation and digital technology, and then you have people running them and only exceptions are managed. So as a leader, you need to be very well connected with the automation algorithms and all that you've got. So that's why bots or algorithms are, I think, pretty important.
Noted your points. So considering the major challenges now in terms of technology, I mean, technology is not a challenge, but adopting right technology has become a challenge. How is it for Amazon? Because Amazon itself has developed so many technologies. So sometimes I wonder whether they develop business first or then they develop technologies first. For example, most of the companies are going on cloud, which is by Amazon services. So how is it for you, adopting your own internal technologies?
I think it's not hunky-dory is one way I could say that. But we have technology in our DNA. And we try to make sure that both internally as well as externally, when I say internally, I'm talking about internal company processes. And when I say externally, I'm talking about our business of serving customers through either e-commerce or cloud computing, or as you said, Alexa or whatever. Technology is at the center of what we do. And sometimes we are so immersed into it that we do have our own challenges, but we try to get better every day. One way we put technology at the center of what we do is also making sure that technology serves customers is whenever we talk about an innovation, we actually write a piece of paper of which about 1 page or so is what we call a press release, which is a little bit about what is the customer, what is the customer's problem that has been solved, and how did we use technology or the innovation that is being proposed to solve that problem for the customer, and what did the customer have to say about it as a quote. So it almost reads like a press release where we have a hypothetical customer saying, oh, I'm grateful that I had this problem and this problem has been solved because of this technology. Obviously, Amazon would have provided the technology, but it articulates very clearly the benefit that comes to the customer. So it's otherwise very easy to get lost in technology and forget about making a difference to actually solving a real life problem for a customer. So this brings customer and technology together more.
Sure. So, two points, Raghav. Maybe I don't have a specific questions, but two important thoughts. Let me share it with you. One is, when you say that technology is at heart at your company, but for CFOs, finance is, the major heart, or that is the tradition. So one, how do you, look at it? Because CFO's heart is finance, but now you say the company is technology and you have to work with the technology company and take it to the next level. That is one. Second is also, traditionally the CFO's mindset is this, that, earning shareholders profit, taking to a company to a next level, and creating more shareholders, following a lot of compliance, which means very traditional type. How do you actually, look at this both and still run a successful company?
Yeah, I think there's no dichotomy between the two. And I spoke a little while earlier. As finance, you're very well focused on controllership, on cash flows, on governance, and making sure that your metrics for financials, your budgets and your variances against budgets are very well tracked. I think the way to make sure that this is geared to the DNA of the organization, which is really serving a customer, is to make sure that you have financial models that tell you how your cash flows are actually linked to the customers that you serve. So for example, in course of our budgeting process, we very clearly run the math between how many customers did we acquire, how many customers lapsed out, and the customers who are transacting, are they transacting more with us this month or this quarter versus last quarter? And the margins at which we are serving them, is our costs coming down with scale or not? And are our revenues improving? And therefore, what is the residual cash flows? And that is what flows into financials. So as you can see, we're able to tease out the entire conversation between what business people spend their time on, which is going out and building products and services that actually engage more customers, and what I or my colleagues in the finance team would look at, which is the P&L and the health of the business, including their cash flows. It's important to get that right. Otherwise, you would be operating in your ivory tower, where you would talk about cash flows, and maybe another part of the business is completely focused only on technology. And a third part of the business is worried about sales or serving customers, and you don't thread all of them together. So by following this approach, we thread all of it together and stay connected as an organization, despite it being pretty large in size and scale.
Sure. I will also take a couple of questions from the audience after shooting this question to you, Raghav. Meanwhile, I will ask my team to get the mics ready. Raghav, my question to you now is, Amazon, obviously, the e-commerce website or shopping, everything is so famous about Amazon. The Gen Z millennials, we all have been using Amazon extensively. Many appreciate it for the UI, UX part of it. So it looks seamless to few people. They may face challenges also. But if you as a CFO could tell us, what are the major challenges that you face while handling Amazon itself? You could take a liberty and tell us, so that it would be a learning lessons for a lot of CFOs also.
Yeah, I'm not sure I can be that candid. But I think one of the challenges we face is we might get so obsessed about our technology and the cool products that we are building, or the cool experience that we are offering, or the innovations that we are driving, that we don't link it to what really delights shareholders, which is shareholder returns. So sometimes that linkage breaks down, and making sure that that linkage stays intact, and there is no conflict between delighting your customers, keeping your prices low over the long term, making sure that your costs are under control, and you keep a high standard on quality, which obviously always comes at an expense, and making sure that it is linked to business performance. I think that's one of the challenges that we face in the organization. The other thing is, the organization can get so large that threading all of it is, and at least we think of our organization like a spider's web, if I could say, because it grows in different directions. Most organizations are pyramidal, So they grow like a pyramid, and somebody at the top can sort of keep an eye on what is happening. But in a spider's web, it can grow in all directions. So how do you make sure that even if an organization grows large, like a spider's web, as I metaphorically described, it still continues to operate like a startup? That's another challenge that we have. And the way we manage it is, we have codified our operating principles into what we call as tenets or leadership principles. And there are 14 of them. And those are rules that everyone who works as an employee in Amazon knows. And we believe that if a person closest to serving the customer on the front line practices these tenets, then you get the power of a large organization without bureaucracy coming in, but with the speed of a startup. So making sure that people in the front line operate with that set of tenets, which would be very similar to tenets that people in senior leaderships in some organizations operate, cuts down our speed of decision making and make sure that we operate quickly. And making sure that this is working is, for example, one of the challenges that we face.
Okay, noted your point, Raghav. Obviously, I have a couple of questions, but I will take some from audience as well. So anybody? Yes, please, Rohit.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, thank you, sir, for sharing your insights. As you mentioned, the CFO really needs to be connected with different facets of the business. So really curious to know, how do you allocate your time, or how do you schedule your calendar amongst all these multi priorities which you may be facing on an everyday basis? Thank you.
So I allocate my time broadly between maybe 3 areas, and I would have touched upon it earlier. First is the governance part of it. Yeah, looking at our balance sheet, looking at our P&L, making sure that the P&L for this month, I understand what has changed from the P&L from previous months. And we do it through a series of meetings where we have reasonably well-developed reports that tell us what is happening. So that tells me the numbers and the story through the numbers. Then second part, I sit in a lot of business reviews where usually I am either listening or reading documents, and I of course get a chance to ask questions. So this helps me through conversations or listening into conversations stay connected with the core part of running the business, so that I know what exactly are the problems we are facing, whether there is, let us say, a drop in quality, or there is a competitive activity, or some part of our innovation hasn't worked, or some part of our innovation is really working well and we want to double it down. So that's the second part where I sort of spend my time, because it then helps me sort of understand our business and how well that business is serving customers. The third part, and because I do manage a team, and every leader of a team knows that this is important, you need to spend time just listening with your people, listening to your people, managing talent, giving people feedback, coaching them, assessing them, making sure that you follow the right rigor when you promote people. I spend a lot of my time, by the way, also hiring people, and making sure that when we hire people, we spend a lot of time thinking about whether that person, he or she, is going to be a fit with our culture or not. And then, of course, managing talent, and both good as well as bad talent, and then making sure our appraisals are done properly. So these 3 things are where I sort of spend a lot of my time: the governance, the metrics, the finance aspects of it, the business and the business conversations, and the third, just managing the finance talent. Because at the end of the day, if you manage finance talent well, they will do a good job of replicating whatever work I need to do. Each of them will replicate that, and that helps me in my job. So those are 3 things.
Yeah, sure. Really meaningful, Raghav. Any other question?
Like Amazon's core philosophy in terms of build versus buy. Yeah. So what my question is, like, if there's somebody brings a solution which is third party or built by somebody else, is Amazon receptive towards that, or they would rather build it on its own? I mean, I can give you an example. Like, I'm from the payments industry. So Adyen, for example, is a large payments aggregator, right? So their philosophy is they will not buy it; they'll build it on their own. Yeah. So what is Amazon's core DNA in terms of building a solution?
So it's a good question, and we have thought about it. And before I answer the question, I wanted to call out the framework, because that then leads to the answer. We think about the long term. Yeah. So we don't worry too much about. I mean, of course, we need to operate at speed, and we can be scrappy. But we want to think long term, and we want to think scale. And we believe that many of our costs can come down over a period of time if you think long term and if you think scale. So our experience has been that if you build some of these things in-house, you have a better control over quality, and you can make sure that they scale well. And because then it's integrated into the rest of your systems in Amazon. And then over a period of time, you can sort of bring down your costs as opposed to depending on maybe third parties or vendors. At least that's one framework that we have for thinking. But of course, we do make exceptions to that. But since you answered a generic question, that's a framework. Long-term control over quality and making sure that it supports our growth when we operate at high scale. And if these are the three boxes you need to tick, you usually find out that it is better to build it yourself rather than to rely on somebody else.
Sure.
There's another very practical aspect which comes in, especially in technology. We also have a very high bar on information security, especially customer data, etc. And one of the things we have learned through experience is that when you get something from a third party and you try to connect it with our organization, the plumbing isn't very tight. And there is a lot of scope for leakage of data, and we are obsessed over it. And therefore, because that is almost treated as a SEV 1 or a SEV 0 defect for us, a leakage of customer information. And we think we can manage it better if it's done sort of in-house. That's one framework here.
Sure. Any other question? Yes, please. Can we have a mic here?
Shall I start?
Yes,
first?
please.
Yeah. So Raghav, my name is Gopal, and just have one question. It's more about the unreconciled items, right? So being the large at volume, like any e-commerce company, the business data, like the business data and the finance data, sometime, do not talk together, right?
Yeah.
So what is your kind of, let's say, focus on that? And second is within the finance system as well, right? As a link between that, that online server to get into the Teradata or static server. So do you leave those unreconciled items on the filtration process, which may happen any part of Word or part of their shared services support? Or do you also see as a finance process improvement, that how it can be addressed on regular basis and how the gaps can be, as minimum as possible? So what is your thoughts on that?
It's a very specific question that you asked me. I don't know if I can give you that specific an answer. But you're right to call out that when you operate at large scale, and when you say large scale, there are a lot of complex events that can happen in an organization. Customer cancels an order, customer itself suspends their account, the payment instrument has changed, maybe the customer's address has changed, bank account has changed. I'm just bringing in the number of variables. It is quite possible that sometimes you're left with unreconciled data. So you're right that when you operate at large scale, that is possible. I think the way we manage that, or we try to manage that, and I think we can always do a better job than we do today, is we have, as I said, fairly good monitoring mechanisms internally where we approach each of these as defects. And whenever this gets identified, in this specific example, it might be a P&L review, it might be a balance sheet review, or by the way, it could also be a customer complaint which said, as an example, the customer said, I didn't get my money back, though I cancelled an item and Amazon did not respond to me. And then when we investigated, we could find out that some part of our pipeline is broken. And then we treat it as a defect, and internally we write what is called a COE, which is a correction of errors. Yeah? So rather than holding somebody accountable and maybe firing that person, we actually have an internal sort of way of thinking that since we are a software company, it is quite normal when you have large technology platforms that there are bugs in it. So through a COE process, which is a correction of an error, we use a customer anecdote or an internally surfaced defect to root cause it and then take an action item to fix it. So over a period of time, these defects hopefully come down. But at the scale at which you grow, you also discover new defects, etc. But the important part is that maybe I'm getting a little wider than the specific response that you're looking for. In the organization, whenever you find defects like this, and unreconciled is one example of a defect, the culture in the organization should be to welcome the discovery of those defects and focus the attention on solving the problem rather than blaming somebody who might have been responsible for that defect. We don't spend time on the blame part of it. We actually shine the light on the problem, solve it, and then circulate the learnings more widely. We believe that that culture is better over a period of time to bring down these unreconciled items. Otherwise, you will always have dirt being swept under the carpet if you start blaming people as an example about what to do. I don't know if I've answered your question, but that's a little bit of how we think about defects which are broader than unreconciled items.
Sure, Raghav. I think really meaningful. Yeah, one last question from you, quickly.
Raghav sir, for sharing your insights. Again, while I understand that Amazon generally have long-term plans, you operate on long-term strategic plans for each of the categories you operate in, or each of the markets you operate in. But there will always be short-term disruptions, like in one of the categories you have very strong competition coming up.
Yeah.
How do you generally react to it, both from the org perspective and finance perspective?
Yeah, I think you have a good point, and I think the language that we use is our vision should be clear. I think the phrase that we use very often is strategically we are very patient, but tactically we are very impatient. Yeah, so we are very clear that about our vision, which by the way is to be Earth's most customer-centric company and to think long-term. But often in the short end, there are a lot of disruptions that happen, and there are enough and more of these that, I mean, anyone who reads the newspapers know what disruptions can happen. It's very important to then be nimble, flexible, and a little agile, but to stay, North Pole or North Star focused on what your long-term vision is. So it's hard to bring it into words, but if the thinking in the organization is that the vision hasn't changed, but the tactics might change because of some new development that we have got, I think that helps us sort of get over some of these sort of learnings. And as I said earlier, we are also very vocal about acknowledging that there would be defects, and we are quite okay with sort of changing our course in between as long as the long-term purpose remains the same. And there is no shame or embarrassment in acknowledging that we have made a change, or there is something that we said maybe yesterday, a plan we were following yesterday which has changed now. So as long as that culture is there in the organization of being long-term focused and not digging in your heels and being stubborn about it and being flexible, I think you can get over those situations.
Oh, sure, I think that was really meaningful, Raghav. I think the time is up, but I will just take 5 to 10 seconds, and if you could just sum up maybe in few words and give suggestions to the CFO world in terms of what is that one thing that the CFO should carry going forward, because it's a VUCA world and it will keep on evolving, the changes will keep on happening. So what is that maybe 1 or 2 key words that you think the CFO should follow going ahead?
I mean, I don't know if I have 1 or 2 words, so I'll maybe take a minute if
Sure.
it's okay. I'm sure you've heard this. Change is the only constant. So maybe if you let me to do a sentence, I would say that. Change is a constant, but since you mentioned VUCA, I'll take another minute more and respond. VUCA, as all of us know, is volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, which is what the world has been. And that's the way the world has been described, at least for me, since 2008, when the previous crisis hit. The way you deal with that is don't focus on the volatility. Make sure that your vision is static and unchanging. Don't worry too much about the uncertainty. You can't give certainty to your team, but you can give them clarity on your decision framework. So uncertainty, replace it with clarity. The third one was complexity. I think all senior leaders should always be good at simplifying things. As you grow, things become complex, but it's a superpower that all leaders should have to be able to simplify things. So the complexity gets sorted by simplicity. And of course, things will always be ambiguous. You don't know whether it's black or white, or it's guilty or innocent, or what it is. But just be agile in what you're doing, which is what I think I gave as an answer a little while back. So your VUCA would be replaced by purpose of the vision, keeping things simple, making sure you're nimble, and you focus on the clarity rather than trying to get into certainty. Yeah?
Sure. Thank you so much, Raghav. In fact, now your alarm is also ringing. The time is already up. Noted your points. I think that was really meaningful. Thank you so much for being part of ETCFO Turning Point and sharing your perspectives here. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, for listening to us very patiently. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting.